Hi, I'm David Bell. In the early 2000s, Reverend Dr. Susan J. Thompson's PhD thesis on the history of Trinity Theological College was awarded a Vice-Chancellor's prize. It signalled scholarship of the highest order. After numerous requests, in 2010, Susan's work was published by the Wesley Historical Society. Its title was Knowledge and Vital Piety, Education for Methodist Ministry in New Zealand from the 1840s. Now, I've dipped in and out of this book for a long time. It touches upon a number of significant recurrent themes. In some ways, they're the bread and butter of New Zealand society, the partnerships with Maori, the changing mores of society, the challenges of diversity, as well as the theological education of Methodist ministers. Dr. Thompson's sense of how to craft history is quite splendid. She writes elegant prose, which tells the stories and themes down the decades. But as time goes on, one less obvious factor has come into sharper focus for me personally. And that's the problem of the relative successes and failures of the various endeavours and missions of the Methodist Church, including theological education. Many New Zealand Methodists are aware that over its short history, the Church has grown very wealthy. It's also become very weak in numerical terms. Even the highly successful growth of the Tongan churches, particularly in South Auckland, hasn't changed the fact that the Church is unimportant to the vast majority of the population at large. And that's where Knowledge and Vital Piety does more than give an historical account. Its title implies a highly significant question, and I think it's a question of great importance for the future. Candidates for Methodist ministry have always felt the tension between their newfound theological knowledge and awareness and their own unique sense of call, which gives rise to their personal piety. It's implicit through Dr. Thompson's book is this larger issue of how much the laity experienced it. I mean by that, experience knowledge and vital piety, not an experience of knowledge or vital piety. The longer I spend with Knowledge and Vital Piety, the book, the more I experience that elusive sense of Methodism at depth. A few clergy have the ability to convey it, and maybe a few more of the laity, but here's how I see it playing out on the stage that Dr. Thompson set. The biggest change in the world since the Second World War has been around the recognition of human rights. Repressive regimes don't recognise the validity of the UN Declaration, while even more progressive nations and societies still often restrict individual liberties, as do churches. But the Declaration was a sea change. Like so many of the great currents in human thought, however, behind reefs and barriers and peninsulas, some thought wasn't changed very much at all. Was it one of the great physicists who remarked that the only way scientific revolutions happened was to wait long enough so that the opponents died? That's certainly so with church politics. Most of the Christian church has been hidden behind the great barrier reef of dogma. Here's an example. Over more than a century of discussion and debate, New Zealand society has seen the massification, first of primary education, then secondary, and latterly tertiary education. With better education, the familiar church propositions about faith, family, loyalty, tradition, and culture don't necessarily stack up any longer. There have been broad-based and extended dialogue and debates around these issues, around the welfare state, nationhood, war and peace, individual rights and responsibilities. The church has been ignored and marginalised in those debates. Why? the church authorities have continued to defend what have become indefensible concepts. Dr. Thompson touches on this with reference to the philosopher Sir Karl Popper. He taught Methodist minister Reverend John Sylvester, who was later to become a Methodist lecturer in Trinity Theological College. Popper had a profound effect on Sylvester, who now saw how inadequate his preparation had been for discussing broad ideas that laity were already talking about. Now, I studied Popper along with generations of New Zealand tertiary students in Philosophy 101, 201, etc. I also listened as a student and dialogued with John Sylvester. But Popper's ideas cut right across church dogma and any kind of imagined authority. Popper promoted an open society. A refugee from Nazism, his arguments are not just theoretical but profoundly cogent. They are steeped in actual experience of horrendous repression, not just a theoretical framework for openness, toleration, liberty and justice based on universal rights. Dr. Thompson's book shows how lecturers like John Sylvester tried to do more and attempted to make a theological education more relevant, more contemporary. But long before his valiant efforts, in fact, from 1840s onwards, the patterns of how society was organising its wider knowledge and more relevant pieties was rapidly changing. And that's what led to the sea change. Have you ever heard the familiar idea that the laity don't want to leave their intelligence at the door of the church? I've heard from dozens of different lay people. It's not they're against ministers or church people as such. Essentially, it's a complaint against the wider church not understanding its core systemic responsibilities. Knowledge and vital piety belong together for the clergy and the laity, but the church organised itself as if it had the only brand of knowledge and the only brand of vital piety, and it was a clergy preserve alone. The vital pieties of the laity are so wide, so diverse, so incapable of being brought into a church order, they usually end up as if they didn't exist or are dismissed with disdain. Not only that, but that wider knowledge which Sylvester referenced itself is distanced by the church. The church reverts to the flawed notion that it holds a unique revelation. The real revelation is in the knowledge it wants to suppress. As Gerard Manley Hopkins put it, the world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like flaming from shook foil. That's the knowledge and vital piety of Methodism at depth. It's eloquently witnessed in this book. And thanks for watching.